So a lot of people join through that. And let's. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Nauman Ashraf. I'm the chair of the Apna YPC for 2023. I welcome you all to the Apna YPC webinar on a conversation with the Intealth and FSMB leadership. We are honored to have Dr. Pinsky and Dr. Chaudhary join us today for the webinar. I'll just go briefly over the format of the webinar. We'll first I'll introduce Dr. Pinsky, and then he has his presentation for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then I'll introduce Dr. Chaudhary. He has his presentation again for 10 to 15 minutes. And then we'll go into the Q&A section. I have few questions people have sent me, and then you're free to then post your questions in the comment box, and then we'll pick it up from there. So for Dr. William Pinsky, he's the Chief Executive Officer of Intealth, President of the ECFMG, and Board Chair of the Foundation for Advancement of International Medical Education and Research. Prior to joining ECFMG in 2016, Dr. Pinsky was Executive Vice President and Chief Academic Officer of the Ochsner Health System in Louisiana. He also served as Executive Vice President of the Ochsner International and Professor and Head of the Ochsner Clinical School. He also held a number of senior academic and executive roles at Wayne State University School of Medicine in Detroit, Michigan, and at the Detroit Medical Center. He's a past board member of the ACGME, as well as the Alliance of Independent Academic Medical Centers, where he also served as president. Dr. Pinsky is a pediatric cardiologist. He received his medical degree from St. Louis University School of Medicine and trained at Baylor College of Medicine and Texas Children's Hospital. His honors include the Leadership Award from the Faculty of Medicine and Biological Sciences of the University of Queensland and the Founders Award from the American Academy of Pediatrics. With that, I'll now invite Dr. Pinsky for his presentation. I'm gonna share it here. And okay, I have the control.
Perfect. That's great. I hope everybody can see that. Nauman, thank you for the for the invitation to be here today, as well as for the very kind introduction. Hank, it's good to see you again as well. I think this is a great opportunity for a discussion about ECFMG requirements for certification, as well as maybe a little bit of a glimpse into the outlook of opportunities for international medical graduates. If I could have the next slide, please. So I'm going to start off by talking about Intealth. Intealth might be a strange name, a new name for many of you. And I want to explain what it means, because I know everybody's really concentrating on ECFMG, and ECFMG hasn't changed at all. This is just sort of an organizational element for us. Back in 2021, we announced Intealth as a brand that was over both FAMR and ECFMG. And it really is the result of several years of work of transforming how we work in terms of the integration of both ECFMG and FAMR. There's so much expertise in both organizations. It was important to bring things together to get as much of an impact as possible. This gives us the framework to grow and diversify, to serve all of you, the communities around the world as well. Next slide. This is what Intealth looks like. We actually have combined the corporations of ECFMG and FAMR, because previously they were two separate 501c3 organizations. So they're now combined into this single private nonprofit organization. As you all are familiar, ECFMG, which is now a division of Intealth, continues to serve the public by evaluating qualifications of physicians worldwide. I know everybody thinks about us as the certifying agency for international graduates to come into the United States, but we also do this for over 20 countries around the world. FAMR, which was established approximately 23 years ago, the Foundation for the Advancement of International Medical Education and Research, as a spinoff from ECFMG, supports health professionals and professions worldwide, primarily through education programs and research. A lot of what is done with FAMR is faculty development in addition to the research. Next slide, please. So Intealth has now gone from being just a brand overseeing the two organizations to being the name of our corporation. It unites a common vision for ECFMG and FAMR. It aligns the missions to give us the synergy that is so important, while at the same time retaining the same type of portfolio of services that all of you are very much familiar with. So from an ECFMG perspective, we continue to serve the public, assuring qualifications, providing primary source verification of individuals, and support international medical graduates who seek GME in the United States. While FAMR and its partnerships and collaboration conduct data analyses and research to inform the policies of ECFMG and others, support the education of physicians and healthcare professionals worldwide, and develop the resources on the healthcare workforce used by global communities. We've just recently opened up a brand new FAMR Institute in East Africa, based in Kampala in Uganda. Next slide, please. As I think everybody is very much aware that the IMG route to US GME is not easy, and it takes quite a bit of resilience for the applicants. And I'm always very much in awe of our international medical graduates who begin this journey. The application for certification, and this sort of cartoon here is supposed to show the path with all the jelly beans that start in this funnel, and as they go through the process and the numbers that go down. Primary source credential verification is extremely important in terms of assuring the public as well as program directors of who the applicants are. And that's probably a pretty unique intellectual property that we have. Way back when, ECFMG had its own series of tests for international medical graduates, and a number of years ago decided to join and partner with USMLE in using those tests as part of the certification. And that would be step 1 and step 2 CK. Probably many of you remember step 2 clinical skills exam. Again, way back when, ECFMG had a clinical skills assessment exam, and then moved to partner with USMLE. At the onset of the pandemic, when it was not feasible to offer that exam anymore, we developed the pathways, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. Those individuals that get through to this point, then we're pleased to enter them into the ERAS, the AAMC plan, to be able to be in the match. And those who are successful, we are the only agency that the U.S. Department of State authorizes to sponsor the J1 visa. We currently probably have, not probably, we do have significantly over 13,000 J1 visa holders that we sponsor. The arrow at the bottom, indicates a 3-year process to get to the point of getting into ERAS. It does not take 3 years on an average to verify the credentials. This is sort of a compilation of looking at the number of people who have applied and how long it takes really to get through the USMLE, in addition to the verification. And it really starts, that 3 years starts when we get a letter of inquiry or an email of inquiry. So a lot of it has to do with the candidate and the candidate's ability to get through the process of USMLE exams. Next slide, please. Well, we've been doing this for over 70 years. And we evaluate the readiness of international medical graduates to enter into supervised care of patients within a GME program. Certification is required to be in an accredited program, and it was required for an eventual unrestricted medical license. And Dr. Chaudhry, Hank might have some comments about that later on. With the oversight of our board, we set the requirements and determine which exams and what process meet our requirements. And as you can guess, over 70 years, this has evolved to this point. Next slide, please. Currently, the requirements for ECFMG certification are listed here on this slide. The number one is that the medical school has to meet ECFMG requirements. That currently the medical school requirement is that it needs to be licensed in its country. The graduates of that school are allowed to eligible for a license to practice in that country, and that the curriculum is comparable to a U.S. Curriculum. Not that we judge the elements of the curriculum, but it's the overall curriculum. There are some situations in some countries, for example, in China, where a school may be primarily traditional Chinese medicine, that would not meet our requirements. Applicant then, as I indicated before, would successfully pass step 1, step 2 CK. And then what has changed with the pandemic, instead of having a clinical skills exam, the applicant needs to fit into one of our pathways, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. And on top of all of this, we do primary source verification of the diploma to be sure it's real, the transcript of the medical school, and the identity of the individual. Next slide. Here's a very, very brief summary of the pathways. When clinical skills exam went away in 2020, we still felt we had the obligation to the public to assure that we were measuring things similar to what was in the clinical skills exam. Primarily, that would be communication and professionalism. We felt that was important, not just for the public, but also for the program directors, so the program directors could be assured of the individuals who were in the match. And you can see the 6 pathways here. The first year, we actually only had, we only had 5 pathways. And then after the first year, we added the 6th. And I think these speak pretty well for what they represent, and you can read them off the slide. The pathway 6 actually is a mini CEX, which I know in internal medicine in particular is a frequent way of evaluating individuals' clinical abilities, particularly with a communication perspective. On top of, or not on top of, but in conjunction with these pathways, again, to ensure the communication aspect and capabilities of the individuals, we sought a partner who had an existing exam or an exam that could evolve with us that would measure that. Again, to reassure the public and program directors. And we chose the occupational English test. This is an exam that has been developed by Cambridge University in the UK. It's actually run out of Melbourne, Australia, but it's a Cambridge University product. Cambridge University has a long history of expertise in languages and communication. So in addition to qualifying through one of these pathways, an individual also has to pass successfully the OET examination. And this examination is given throughout the world. While previously individuals had to come to the United States to take the clinical skills exam, now they can do most everything either in their home country or at least very close by. Next slide. So how are the international medical graduates doing in the match? I'm sure everybody keeps hearing about the number of new allopathic medical schools and the expansion of existing ones, as well as hearing about the growing number of osteopathic medical schools, all of which add more individuals into the funnel and the competition for GME positions. The good news is international medical graduates continue to have great value to program directors. And as you can see from the numbers on this slide, international medical graduates continue to be successful in the match. I've been in my role for just about 7 years, and we've seen over that 7 years a continued increase in applications. With the pandemic, it's interesting, in 2021, we sort of had a blip up in the year after the pandemic. I think that was a lot of applications that probably, were in the pipeline, and those applications slowed down during that first year of the pandemic. So there was catch up in 2021. But now we're seeing another rebound. And in fact, in 2023, for the match this year, we've had more applications than we've ever had before. And the good news for those of you who are in this webinar and wanting to know about possibilities of graduate medical education, the success rate continues to go up, both in terms of the percentage who match as well as the absolute number. Next slide, please. So there's also, a growing number of U.S. international medical graduates. All international medical graduates are not foreign nationals. So you can see on this slide the increase in the match of a little over 250 of U.S. citizens compared to the prior year, but also 461 of non-U.S. Citizens. And while the U.S. citizens have a bit of a higher match rate, there's also fewer of them. The non-U.S. citizen international medical graduates, the foreign nationals, also continue to go up. And so the opportunity to match is significant. Next slide, please. Going forward, we are amending the requirements for individuals, not the requirement for individuals. What we're amending is how we're going to note the medical school from which applicants have graduated. In 2010, the then ECFMG board passed a resolution stating that by 2023, we would only accept applications from individuals who graduated from a medical school that has been accredited, where the accrediting agency has been recognized by an outside body to be doing a proper accreditation. Because of the pandemic, we have moved that from 2023 to 2024. I can tell you that at the time, the board was focused on individuals applying for certification to come to the United States. When I joined the organization 7 years ago, it became apparent to me that they were actually much loftier, much higher goals that could be attained with this. I think that this, this process has stimulated international accreditation efforts, which is absolutely true. We're finding that we've been able to promote universally accepted standards. We've harmonized the standards with which the accrediting agencies work for undergraduate medical education. This is resulting in enhanced quality of medical education, which gives an opportunity, at least it's one variable that can improve healthcare in countries around the world. And while we're assuring the public in the United States about where individuals are coming from. We're also assuring the public in many countries around the world. This is really important. I think we all recognize how medical education has become globalized. Also that physicians, as well as other healthcare workers, are moving across borders. And it's so important to know that there is some commonality to the background of these individuals. And in the last almost 2 decades, there's been a very rapid growth of medical schools opening around the world, and what appears to be variable quality in those medical schools. While there have been accreditation standards and systems around the world previously, there's a lot of variability with that. And I think by having this requirement in this program, it puts ECFMG, or allows ECFMG to really uniquely affect change for the better around the world. Next slide, please. So while the initial policy that was passed in 2010 stated that only individuals who graduated from accredited schools would be eligible for certification, we've now amended that. Our board has looked at where we are in 2024 and feels that this momentum has been very good in terms of schools and accrediting agencies participating in the program. But also we recognize that there are individuals graduating from medical schools that maybe have not yet gotten into this program, that have very good graduates, and many of our training programs around the country are very comfortable in accepting people from those programs. So instead of limiting the people who can apply, what we're doing now is in 2024, we will report in the World Directory of Medical Schools what the accreditation status is of medical schools. The World Directory of Medical Schools is an entity that we partner with the World Federation of Medical Education, and is the source for medical schools around the world. In addition, we will be able to put in the ERAS file of individuals applying for residency programs what the status of their school is from which they graduated. This way, it does not affect an individual's eligibility for certification, but what it does is allows program directors to make their own decisions whether or not this is something they want to consider in ranking individuals for their training programs. Next slide, please. So the recognized accreditation means that accrediting agency of a medical school has been reviewed by an external entity, basically a quality assurance review. The two entities that are doing this, the main one is the World Federation for Medical Education that started this over a decade ago. And then in the United States, part of the US Department of Education is the National Committee on Foreign Medical Education and Accreditation. So we'll be listing the recognition that occurs from both of those or either of those organizations, and that will meet the essence of the policy. Next slide, please. So overall, what I wanted to get across today is that I think it's a very optimistic future for international medical graduations. The continual growth of applications for certifications show that there's a sustained interest in the US GME programs. Likewise, the match results show that there's a sustained interest by program directors. The individuals who go through this graduate medical education will continue to make important contributions globally. While we are committed to the smooth operation of this certification program to enable international graduates to participate in United States graduate medical education, we continue to have 3 guiding lights. Number one is to assure the public that those individuals who will be participating in the supervised care of them have been appropriately certified. Number two, assure program directors that they will have a robust pool of qualified applicants. And number three, work to facilitate and enable international medical graduates to continue their professional development by coming here for graduate medical education. And I think that's my last slide. And I went through this quickly because I want to make sure we have ample time for discussion, and look forward to questions and participating on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pensky, for a wonderful presentation. I'm gonna introduce Dr. Chaudhary, and then we'll have his presentation. So Dr. Chaudhary is the president and CEO of the Federation of State Medical Boards. He's a graduate of NYU and NYIT College of Osteopathic Medicine and Harvard School of Public Health. Dr. Chaudhary did a rotating internship at St. Barnabas Hospital, followed by an internal medicine residency at NYU Langone, Long Island Hospital. He served as a DIO at the Long Beach Medical Center and as the Department of Medicine Chair and Assistant Dean at NYU IT-Com. He rose to the rank of Major in the U.S. Air Force Reserves, having served as a flight surgeon. He's a former health commissioner for New York's Suffolk County on Long Island, and the author and co-author of over 80 peer-reviewed articles and co-author of 2 books. From 2016 to 2018, he was the chair of the International Association of Medical Regulatory Authorities. In 2022, he was listed by Modern Healthcare as one of the 100 most influential people in healthcare. So, Dr. Chaudhary, thank you for joining us, and let's see if you can share your slides.
I actually am sharing my slides. Can you see them?
Great, yes, you can see them.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ashraf, and thank you to UPNA for inviting me to this webinar. I should mention I'm a lifetime member of UPNA and value all the good work that you do in your young physicians section as well as the organization. I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C., where the FSMB has an office. I'll tell you a little bit more about FSMB in a moment, but I'm delighted to be here on this webinar with my colleague, Dr. Pensky. He and I didn't get a chance to coordinate our slides, so I was curious if there would be any overlap, and I'm delighted to learn that there actually our presentations complement one another, which is not surprising since I've known Bill for quite some time, but hopefully this will be of value to your audience. I should also say at the outset that we greatly value the role of the ECFMG in all that they do, but particularly in their role in primary source credentials verification of international graduates, but also it's been said that the ECFMG is the Dean's office for international graduates, and that makes perfect sense, and they certainly do a lot to defend the role of the international graduates in the United States. So I bring you greetings also from our board of directors. The FSMB's board is elected by the nation state licensing boards. We have about 16 of them, and so they represent a wide swath of the country. The gentleman to my left, I'm in the blue tie, is Dr. Jeffrey Carter, the current chair of the FSMB and anesthesiologist from the state of Missouri. A little bit of background about the FSMB, just like Bill gave you a little background about the ECFMG. We're a little bit older than the ECFMG. We were founded 111 years ago. We represent all 70 of the state and territorial medical and osteopathic licensing boards in the United States, not only for licensing physicians, but also physician assistants and other healthcare providers. We are a nonprofit. We have about 170 full-time employees. And our primary headquarters are near Dallas, Texas. But as I mentioned, we also have a Washington, D.C. advocacy office. Just to give you some numbers, since we have a audience that's largely of Pakistani descent, these are the countries with the largest number of international graduates who are actively licensed in the U.S., comparing going back to about a decade to as recently as 2021. We update these numbers all the time, and there's actually in the next couple of months in our Journal of Medical Regulation, we'll be updating these numbers. So they're going to be a little bit higher. But India, for the longest time, has been the largest provider of IMGs who ultimately seek residency training and become licensed in the US. The Caribbean has grown by leaps and bounds over the last few decades. But if you notice, Pakistan is number 3. It's moved up from number 4. Philippines used to be number 3, but in the last 5 years or so, Pakistan's numbers are continuing to grow. And as I say, these numbers will be probably 600 or 700 higher each year that we look at these numbers. In terms of where the physicians graduate from, those who graduate from Pakistan, the top 5 schools, actually the top 10 are listed here, but the top 5, Dow Medical, University of the Punjab, King Edward Medical College, Aga Khan, Sindh Medical College, and Allama Iqbal. I had the honor just last month of visiting the first 3 of these medical schools and was very impressed with what I saw, the energy and excitement of the students, but also the quality of the clinical exposure and experiences that they're getting. So great things are happening in graduate medical education in Pakistan. Next year, I hope to visit India as well, because they are also a large provider of international graduates. Spending a little bit of time on the USMLE exam, I think your audience and you know that this is a joint program of the FSMB and the National Board of Medical Examiners. The NBME were founded in 1991 as a pathway to medical licensure for physicians with MD degrees, physicians with DO degrees obtained in the US, and IMG students and graduates. And as Bill mentioned, we had a very close collaborative relationship and working relationship with the ECFMG when we had the Step 2 clinical skills exam. We're currently at about 100,000 test administrations around the world. More than 70% of licensed physicians in the US. There are more than 1 million licensed physicians in the US, but about more than 70% have taken all or part of the USMLE exam or one of its predecessor exams, like the NBME exam or the FLEX examination that some of the older international graduates may be familiar with. In terms of USMLE content and policy input, people sometimes ask, where do the questions come from? How do you determine, the content? And so there are a number of buckets from which we get that. Obviously, the state medical boards is an important piece of that because the exam ultimately serves as an important tool for eligibility for medical licensure in the United States. So we look to the state boards, we look at their legislative priorities, we look at their CME requirements, which may change from time to time. In recent years, because of the opioid epidemic, there's been a lot of questions about pain management and both, prescribed opioids as well as illicit synthetic opioids. We also look at complaints that the licensing boards receive from the public about physicians and their competence or their behaviors or their professionalism or lack thereof. We look at disciplinary actions that have been given. And we also have a lot of public members who serve not only on our state licensing boards, but in many of our committees, including our content writing committees as well, to make sure that that public voice is also part of the process. The second bucket is clinicians in clinical practice, making sure we are up to date on diseases, epidemiology, and technological advancements. But that said, we don't try to be too far ahead of the curve. We want to make sure there's adequate time for these kinds of advancements to reach out into the clinical space. So if a new disease is discovered and reported in New England Journal or JAMA, don't expect it to show up very quickly in the USMLE. It may over time, but we try not to be cutting edge with content because content can change very rapidly. But we do try to keep up to make sure that it's representative of what physicians see, not only in the US, but around the world. And then the third bucket, let me minimize my screen here, is medical education. And that's specifically the faculty who serve on US medical schools, but increasingly from international medical schools as well. Subject matter experts, we do surveys all the time. We look at the published research, not only about content, but also about assessments. And we also look at examinees. So I don't know if you all know this, but we have advisory committees made up of international graduates as well as USMD students, USDO students, et cetera, who provide guidance into content and basic policy decisions. But for larger policy discussions, sometimes we need more than this. And so let me spend a moment let's see, to talk about what happened back in 2018-19, just before the pandemic, which seems like a decade ago, but this was when in 2018, the CEOs of 5 national organizations, AMA, AAMC, that's the Association of American Medical Colleges, our colleagues and friends at ECFMG, the FSMB, and the National Board, agreed to co-sponsor an invitational conference on USMLE scoring. We had lots of discussions, but 3 of the recommendations that emerged were, 1, that we should consider changing step 1 scores to pass fail. 2nd was to accelerate research on the correlation of USMLE performance and its outcomes in clinical practice. And 3, to do everything we can to minimize racial and demographic differences. So this ultimately led to 30,000 comments we received, but ultimately the decision was made by the USMLE program and the parents of the organization of the program, the NBME and the FSMB, to change the score reporting of step 1 from a numerical score to pass fail for a variety of reasons, which we can get into in the conversation if needed. But I should mention that there are no plans to convert step 2 CK or step 3 into pass fail. We recognize that making this change was a disruptor, hopefully a positive disruptor in terms of getting schools and students and the profession to focus more on other aspects, that it shouldn't just be a score that determines residency selection, but because we did recognize that the USMLE score has a role to play in residency selection. There are no plans to change anything with step 2 CK scoring or step 3, but we're hoping that the profession writ large begins to look at a portfolio and not just a single quantitative measure to decide who to take into residency programs. Of course, the other thing that happened in the last few years was the coronavirus, the COVID-19, which initially caused all of us to suspend the step 2 clinical skills exam and then ultimately make a decision to discontinue that examination permanently. So now what the exam looks like is we have the 3 steps. We have step 1, which remains largely focused on sciences basic to the practice of medicine. It's a 7-hour test, multiple choice questions, and pass-fail score reporting officially started on January 26th of last year. Step 2 CK standing for clinical knowledge, looks at skills and knowledge specific to patient care under supervision. And Dr. Pinsky used that same term, supervision. That's critical. This is an 8-hour exam, 1 day, multiple choice questions as well. And then step 3 is applying that medical knowledge and understanding to make sure that the applicant for medical licensure by a state licensing board is capable of unsupervised practice of medicine. And that's particularly important to the FSMB, to the Federation of State Medical Boards, and our member boards, because once you demonstrate competency in step 3, having taken step 1 and step 2 CK and passed it, tells us that you're ready for unsupervised practice of medicine. It's an important part of the examination. This is a 2-day examination. 1.5 days is multiple choice questions, and a half a day is computer-based case simulations. Now, how have USMLE examinees done in recent years? These are the most recent data that we have. USMD and DO schools and Canadian schools tend to do a little bit better across all 3 of the steps, and international schools by and large do well, but some schools and some graduates do better than others. So you can't make a general statement about that. But one thing I will note is, since the conversion of the step 1 score to pass-fail, we have noticed, and in the USMLE program, we've had discussions with our colleagues at ECFMG as well, that we've seen the pass rate on step 1 go down a little bit, both for US and Canadian graduates as well as international medical graduates. So if there's one message I want to get across is, yes, the exam is pass-fail now in terms of reporting. It doesn't mean it's less important. It doesn't mean it's easy. So I think there's a danger of complacency, because I think that's important to sort of keep in mind. But as you see, step 2 CK and step 3 international students tend to do much better because they're more related to clinical sciences. In terms of the future, I think Bill knows this, we're all looking at clinical reasoning and recognizing the value of that. Just because clinical skills is no longer a separate component, a separate step of the examination, doesn't mean that we won't be testing for clinical skills. We'll just be doing it in different formats in the existing 3 steps that we have. So we're looking at ways in which we can use technology and tools to assess clinical reasoning, which we think is very important. Communication skills remain absolutely important to state licensing boards and to the physician-patient interaction. We may be looking at new item formats. I'm not sure if we're ready to use artificial intelligence, but we're beginning to look at things and looking at what's available. One thing that helps us decide whether or not to make changes in the USMLE exam are questions like this. Is a change that we may be contemplating meaningful? Is it useful? Is it reliable? Is it scalable across all the steps across the country? Is the cost justified, but also is it equitable? Equitable not only for the diversity that we seek of the physician workforce in the US, but also globally, making sure it's equitable in terms of US grads and international graduates as well. And I'm sure Dr. Pinsky agrees with that. A couple of other comments quickly before I turn it back to you, Noman. Looking at COVID-19, it's been a watershed for telemedicine in the US. We went from less than 1% utilization to almost 30% during the peak of the pandemic, where at some point in some parts of the country, there was more telemedicine going on than in-person care. Some of that has diminished somewhat, but we're still at about 10 to 15% of telemedicine across the country. So one of the things we did at the FSMB is work with our state medical boards to see what we could do about improving access to care and licensure portability, the ability to allow physicians to practice in more than one state. This is an article we wrote back in 2015 in the New England Journal about the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact. I just have a couple of slides about this. I don't know if your audience is aware. I know you are, but this began obviously before the pandemic, but it was a means to allow physicians to practice either via telemedicine or in-person care in multiple jurisdictions in a way that's not possible today. So what the state boards developed was an agreement about these 9 eligibility requirements. And if a physician meets all of these 9 requirements, then the states have agreed to issue a license to practice medicine instantly. And I think that's very, very important to understand. So currently, as of today, 37 states plus Washington, D.C. and Guam, those are the states in dark blue, have adopted the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact. If you meet those 9 criteria, you can get a license to practice medicine instantly in as many jurisdictions as you like. You still have to pay a licensure fee. You still have to follow state laws, but the process is like a TSA pre-check. It's a lot more faster than it ever has been before. The states in light blue are considering it. The states in gray haven't formally introduced legislation, but are thinking about it. We also have a PA licensure compact for physician assistants, just to make you aware, basically, of what is happening. It's also happening in other professions. Nursing has had a compact for a number of years. Psychology is looking at it for telepsychology, et cetera. Finally, I'll finish up by just mentioning that we are part of IAMRA, the International Association of Medical Regulatory Authorities. Dr. Ashraf mentioned that I used to be the chair of that back in 2016 to 18. The International Association's vision is that everyone around the world is treated and cared for by safe and competent doctors. IAMRA has 118 member organizations from 49 countries, the ones in green. And if you notice, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh are part of that as well. So the Pakistan Medical and Dental Council is a member of IAMRA, and we have a good working relationship with them. And with that, that's my Twitter handle. That's my email address. Thank you so much, Noman, for giving me this opportunity to speak. I hope that met what you were looking for.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary. Yes, it was wonderful. Great talk. So now we can go into some of the questions. And we have a very senior member of our organization, Dr. Fateh Shahzadi, has joined. He has done a lot of work on the advocacy side. So he will also have some questions. I have some questions written down. So let's see. I think we can get into, Dr. Chaudhary, you were talking about, there were some reasons about why they moved towards, for step 1 towards pass and fail. If you can just talk about some of the reasons, what was the rationale behind it?
Sure, and I'll see if Bill wants to add. He was part of that process as well. There was something in the United States that became very peculiar, and it impacted international graduates as well. It was known as Step 1 mania. that this notion that in order to succeed and get into the right profession, at the right specialty, and in the right hospital for residency training, everything seemed to depend on the numerical score for step one. And this was creating some awkward behaviors among medical students in the US, as well as international graduates around the world. And this was odd for a step one type of test, which, as I mentioned, is focused largely, but not entirely, on basic sciences. And so in some US medical schools, for example, students weren't going to classes. From day one, they were focused on doing well on step one. So there was an over-reliance, over-focus on step one more than was necessary. Ultimately, we had lots of discussions. We discussed it with our state licensing boards, and they felt comfortable. They said, look, we just need to know that they have passed. We didn't make the entire exam pass fail because we recognize there is a role to play for a numerical score, and that's why step 2 CK has remained a numerical score for that purpose. But we were hoping that this change would encourage those applying for residencies to go beyond just a number. And I will mention, in my travels to Pakistan, I was pleasantly surprised to see that this was well received by deans and administrators, because students are now asking for opportunities to volunteer in their communities, opportunities for research. We're seeing that in the US as well. People want to be able to demonstrate for residency selection more than a number. And so that's sort of a little bit of the background.
Okay, great. Dr. Pensky, I have a question about the pathways. So my understanding is right now, if you do a pathway, I think there's an expiration date, maybe a 2-year. You have to find a program, and if you are an intern and you finish the first year, then it's permanent. Otherwise, you have to retake the pathway, and there's some fee associated with it.
So
you clarify that.
So the way the pathways were developed, and I should have mentioned it when I was going over the slide, and actually I forgot, was that there's a temporary ECFMG certificate for 3 years to allow individuals to apply for residency programs. And then after successfully completing a year of residency, which would demonstrate clinical capability, then a certificate would become permanent. So at the moment, we're reevaluating or evaluating the expiration aspect of this and what individuals would need to do to go forward. So there's not a new fee established at this time. I think what, again, we needed to sort of pivot very quickly and made some decisions, and now we're looking to see what's best for the public, program directors, and the applicants. So I would just tell everybody to stay tuned.
Okay, and we have a question from Dr. Ahmed Rehan. Dr. Rehan, if you want to talk about, I think I allowed you to speak, so
Yep.
I'm going to go ahead and ask the question. Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning. It's Dr. Ahmed Rehan. I'm an assistant professor of psychiatry at Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine. Thanks, Dr. Ashraf, and a big thanks to Dr. Chaudhary and Dr. Pensky. So I've been involved in the visa advocacy for a lot of IMGs from Pakistan. So my question is that, and I understand the concept of not focusing on the number, which is the scores, and focusing on other aspects. So for IMGs to be a competitive candidate, those aspects does include observerships, externships, research opportunities in US. So when we used to have clinical skill exam, that was one of our ways of getting visa, which was a very legit one. But after that, it has been so difficult to get visa, even on the basis of electives, observerships. Now, recently, an alarming trend has been seen where people are not even able to get visa on the basis of step 3 exam. Now they are ECFMG certified, they have applied for step 3, they have permit and everything. So that has been one of the biggest concerns for IMGs from Pakistan, that they are not even getting visas a lot of time, and they give different reasons. And I understand that State Department has jurisdiction, and of course they can decide. But I was wondering if FSMB can advocate for IMGs that at least if someone is ECFMG certified and they want to apply, because as you have mentioned, step 3 can only be taken in the US. So if ECFMG and FSMB can advocate for that, that would be a great service to all of the IMGs, especially from Pakistan. Thank you.
So I'll start, and I know my colleague, Dr. Pinsky, probably has a thing or two to say. Immigration, we value greatly the role of the ECFMG in looking out for the interests of all IMGs, not just those from Pakistan. But the FSMB is also aware of some of these issues. When we were in Karachi and Lahore last month, I met with the U.S. Consul General in Karachi, and she was fully aware of the issues and doing her best to work with the State Department to convince the powers to be of the value of those kinds of visas to get that training. And so she recognizes the value of medical education that's provided in Pakistan and the need for many of those individuals to come to the U.S. Bill?
Yeah, thanks, Hank. And Dr. Khan, thank you for the question. We meaning Intealth has we have a wonderful relationship and partnership with Department of State. And that's why we were able to open consulates in embassies for visa processing in the spring of 2020 when all the embassies and consulates closed. And we're able to get international medical graduates their visas and come to United States. So we, as I said earlier, we sponsor the J1 visa, and I believe we've been able to help international medical graduates navigate very well with the J1 visa. In terms of taking step 3, step 3, from a trainee perspective, is only needed if somebody is going to be coming on an H1 visa. Step 3 is not needed for entry with a J1 visa. So I would just point that out because I think that's a difference. I do recognize that there are international graduates who, even though they're anticipating coming on a J1 visa, want to take step 3, to further demonstrate to program directors their ability. But it's not a requirement for that. In terms of individuals coming here for observerships, it's sort of the same issue when they used to have to come here for clinical skills exam. I believe they can come in on some sort of visitors, short-term visa and don't require specifically a J visa for that. And this is actually the first I'm hearing about this, and I'm happy to learn more about it. Dr. Khan, if you want to reach out to me separately, and I can have you, talk to our what I call our visa department. It's our visitors program, who might be able to put more light on that. I think one of the reasons that the number of applicants for certification, this is just one reason, not the reason, continues to go up, is because individuals do not have to come here for the clinical skills exam. And that has sort of removed at least one barrier in the process.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. So I think, and I wanted to add to that, I think what's people have noticed, and as a program director, so initially when we had the score reported on the step 1, then program directors, we get so many applications, so they use filters. So in the filter, somebody who was good from IMG even had better score, their application would be looked at. Now it's a pass fail, so that's gone. That one component is gone. So now you are relying heavily, as Dr. Chaudhary was saying, we should look at other domains as well, not just the score. So the other important ones are cultural competency, US exposure to the US healthcare system. And for that, the best way for the IMGs was to get the visa through the CS. And now when they don't have CS, I've heard a lot of time they're not getting visas for step 3 because step 3 is not required to get the residency. So that's the common reason. And then observerships, they would say, yeah, we're not going to give you visa for the observership. They have had so many denials. So now it's very hard for them to come here and get US clinical exposure and then to show it on their CV. So I think it's in that way it's becoming harder. I'm not sure, is there any way to help them out? Like we have, there's a group at APA through IMGs that's trying to figure out how to help them out through observership, or maybe if there's a tele observership, would that count or not? So there are all those thoughts. I think that's where we were getting to with this. There's a visa related question about J1 and H1. So the duration of the residency is, say, internal medicine 3 years, but J1 is a STEM for 1 year. And then you have to, ideally, you go back, you get it stamped and come back, start the program. And if there is something happens, you know, how the international landscape is, or because of whatever reason it goes into advanced processing, then you have to miss some time from the training. H1 used to be for the entire length, I think in the past, now it's also 1 year. Are we doing anything for advocacy for that so it can be STEM for the entire duration? So at least they can get their training.
Yeah, so I had the same question asked to me a week or two ago at the APA meeting about that. I think it's important to differentiate between visa status and a visa, because those are two different things. The reason that the J1 has to be renewed every year, an individual does not have to leave the country to have the J1 visa status renewed, is because the ACGME only allows contracts for 1 year. And because of that, we need to have evidence, the Department of State needs to have evidence that an individual has a contract and then can renew their visa status. And that's the reason for that. And so I can't see how that is going to change going forward. I think the issue in terms of the visa itself in the passport is something separate.
Okay, so we have Dr. Fateh Shahzad. He wants to ask a question. So Dr. Shahzad, you should be able to talk here.
Thank you, Dr. Ashraf, Dr. Pinsky, and Dr. Chaudhary for doing a wonderful job in this seminar. I have one clarification on the Dr. Pinsky statement about step 3. People from Pakistan, they are getting step 3. They were getting step 3 visas on B1, which is a visitor visa.
Mm-hmm.
Now there is some objection from the embassy because those who have not done their house job and not have their PMDC license, they are being denied because they think that they're not certified physicians. The others are getting on step 3 basis, their B1 visas. They come here for 15 to 20 days and they go back. The issue and concern I have is about the administrative processing, especially for those who are doing their residency here, first year, second year, third year, even fellows. So they have to go back if their first year visa is expired, although they can stay on DS 2019 or on their first petition, they can stay for 360 days. After that, their visa is expired, but their visa status is valid. So they can work. But if one of their parents dies or they're sick, they have to go back, especially girls, they get married, so they have to go back. It's a traditional system still in Pakistan. So they are scared of if they go back, their visas goes into administrative processing, which can take 6 weeks to 6 months to clear. So that not only affects these residents and their families, it also affects the program. They run off one of their residents or their fellows. So I think if ECFMG and FSMB does advocate on that behalf that their administrative process should be expedited because it not only affects the residents, but it also affects the hospitals and the programs. Second issue is it's creating very much social issues and anxiety and depression in residents because especially girls, they have to get married. So they kind of go back, it's still arranged marriage system. So they are not going for 3 years, 4 years, so the age factor. I know personally some girls, they've been in their 30s now, they're having a hard time getting married. So just because they're scared that if they go back, their visa will go administrative processing and they will lose their spot. I know one fellow in hepatology and liver surgery, he lost his spot because his AP was for 4 years. So we lost a good doctor in US just because of this process. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the questions and actually more thanks for the comments around that. So I'll just reiterate the visa itself, the visa status doesn't change. It's the visa and the passport that's important. And we have had conversations with the Department of State about this and continue to. It's the policy of Department of State is to process for an individual who has the proper visa status to process their visas very promptly. It requires the cooperation of the consulates and the embassies. And so I'll take this message back again and see how we can continue to advocate for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are at 11. I just want to ask you guys, if you guys have 5-10 minutes, we can get through 2-3 questions. Okay, great. So there's a visa question. Iqbal Hussain asked, I'm currently in US for leadership development program on J1 visa for 3 months, funded by US Department of State. And it has a 2-year home country waiver requirement. But he wants to apply for the residency this year. If he gets matched, would he be able to start residency, or he has to go back and do a waiver?
He does not have to go back. The 2-year requirement really is finishing the J1, finishing one's residency program or fellowship program on the J1. But this would actually be a change in visa status because it's a different J1 category. So one would not have to go back to the country.
Okay. And Dr. Chaudhary, I just wanted to get your opinion on the WFME accreditation issue. So we know that it's going to be it'll be a mention on the ERAS CV and then the World Directory that this school is not accredited. How do you think it can impact the IMGs if their schools are not able to get it done on time?
I'm going to defer to Dr. Pinsky on that, since he works with the World Federation.
Great.
Yeah, so I think what this is going to do is it's going to really leave the decisions up to the program directors in terms of how they want to handle an individual's application. I think it's information that's important. The reason that we pivoted was that if we had remained a requirement to apply for certification, I'm confident, even though a lot of progress has been made, there would be a significant number of individuals who would not have the opportunity to apply. And that this way, it really puts the decision in the hands of the people that make a difference, the program directors. And this is what our board recommended to do at this time, and we'll continue to evaluate it. It's like everything else on the ERAS application. You know, program directors can pick and choose different things to do. From my conversations with program directors, I think that they appreciate having the extra knowledge, but I don't think it's going to change a whole lot in terms of their decision. I don't think it's going to change a whole lot in terms of impeding anybody's interest in proceeding with their professional development.
Right. And do you think licensing body will have any restriction beyond just reporting that the school is not accredited in the near future? Or
I don't think it'll have an impact on state licensing. I think it's more about, as Dr. Pinsky said, it's for residency selection. What matters to the state licensing boards at the end of the day is having passed the assessment examinations of the USMLE, being ECFMG certified, which means you have the credentials verified and that you've completed the number of years of residency training that required. Those are the most important to all of the states and territories in terms of giving a license to practice medicine.
sure. We have a comment in the chat that somebody said that, again, the US healthcare exposures is important. The letter recommendation is important. And a lot of people, they're not getting the visa. If they get the visa, it's only given for 1 month. And, you know, the program directors want to see like 3 to 6 months of experience. I'm not sure if any advocacy can be done at that level with the State Department, that it's important to add the workforce to the US.
Yeah, I mean, we'll continue. We have an ongoing dialogue, and as we hear comments and issues brought up, we definitely take things to them. The main way that we can affect, a positive change, if it's really behavior and not policy change, because the policies are pretty much baked into statutes, and so, but it's just a matter of how it gets applied, and that's what we try to work on.
I think the other thing worth mentioning is I think people on the call know that there's predicted to be a nationwide shortage of physicians across many specialties. And so many of the US medical schools, both MD and DO, have responded by increase in the number of schools, increasing in class sizes, but the number of GME slots for residencies and fellowships have not kept up to date. So we have advocated for more funded GME positions. I know Dr. Pinsky and the ECFMG have as well as many others in the House of Medicine. So that advocacy will continue.
Thank you. Dr. Shahzad, do you have another question? You have a hand up.
Yes, it's actually a request from Dr. Pinsky. You just mentioned about the J1 not need to go back to his J1 visa for the residency. But for last 2 years, 2022 and this year, 2023, those who did get matched and were going to join residency this year and last year, they were required by ECFMG to go back to their country if they had a B1, B2. It did happen many cases. They were not issued DS 2019. So if that policy is not a policy, please make sure that your staff knows about it, because when they do ask that I'm here on B1, B2 valid visa, I can do change of category within US, they were asked to provide I-94 record, which is record of leaving USA before DS 2019 was issued. So that needs to be clarified with your staff who deals with that, because
I'll definitely do that. I really can't believe the staff would say that. And again, because we don't set the requirements, the Department of State sets the requirements, but I'll double check on that. But it's from my knowledge base, a change of status does not require going back to the home country.
Thank you. And also there should be some kind of communication with the APNA or other organization with your visitor or the visa, so we can give a lot of updates as well as input. What are the students are facing, because I being on YPC and advocacy for the last 5 years on APNA, I stay in touch with all those doctors and students, so we can provide a lot of feedback.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, we'll just, this last question we'll do because we're approaching our deadline for the time. So new school accreditation, when there's a new school that opens up, they have to then get accredited with, I think, ECFMG. They fill out the paperwork, and once they get listed, then they can take their USMLE exams. So I got this message from a student. They said their school had applied for the, filled out the paperwork, applied for that certification about a year ago, and they had not heard about it. So what is the way? How do they check? Is there like in ECFMG, there's a department that deals with it, where or students can sort of find the status of their school, and if there are any missing documents, how does that work?
So I'm not exactly sure what the question or the issue is, because we don't certify schools or accredit schools. What we do is in the World Directory, we put a sponsor note. So when a new school opens, you know, if assuming the school, you know, is licensed in the country and graduates can practice there, then there would be a sponsor note in the World Directory. So that's as much as we do, and that's pretty simple administrative process. Actually, and that would be through our department that we call Programs and Services, is where that happens. And so if there's an instance where it hasn't happened, I'd love to know about it, to see if there's an issue.
And that has to happen, the sponsoring through ECFMG, before they can take the steps, right? The USMLE Part 1. From that particular school.
We in our verification, we have to be sure that the individual is eligible to take the USMLE exams. I mean, this is a service we provide basically for USMLE, as Dr. Chaudhry said, acting as the dean's office.
Yeah, I think that's what they meant, and they used the word accreditation. So thanks for clarifying. Okay, so I think 1 minute, if you guys have any final thoughts, and then we can close the session.
I mean, I'll just thank you and everybody else again for the opportunity. We're very interested in having open dialogue and answering questions. And, we post a lot of information on the website. And I also know that, sessions like today can be very, very helpful. So reach out anytime. And Hank, it was good to see you and share this with you today as well.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Noman. Thank you to UPNA. I think hopefully what we shared was informative to your audience, but happy to do this again. I think the more conversations, the more we can do to allay some of the anxieties that are real, that are out there, because we want to be helpful where we can. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining in today, and it was very valuable. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.